things in the soil that the plants need that they can't get themselves. So bacteria and fungi are the primary decomposers in the soil, and they're kind of form the basis of that soil food web. And so they're decomposing all the organic matter, the litter, also, you know, like things like fungi have acids that release critical minerals from the bedrock, in the, not the bedrock, but the
rocks, the rock formations,
the base, you know, base subsoil that comes from bedrock,
right,
that plants are growing in.
And that's where your essential elements come from, right?
Right.
Sodium, potassium, lithium, you know, other metals, which I'm sure are critical in this
Boron,
process.
Magnesium,
Boron,
phosphorus,
magnesium, phosphorus,
manganese,
right?
zinc,
manganese, zinc, iron.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And so the common practices of farming, which create a ton of disturbance, they till the soil, they expose the soil to air and sunlight, which oxidizes these organisms, disables the life cycle and the nutrient cycle,
completely interrupts it. Like, you know, when we, for our viewers, oxidation, we're thinking, you know, a really great way to think of it, you cut an apple in half, if you don't seal it with some sort of lemon juice, bam, it becomes brown. Oxidation meaning it's exposed to oxygen, and in this case, this is not a good thing.
Right. Things degrade, and then, you know, nutrients are lost. And so the soil tests that we found here when we started here were very depleted in all those trace minerals that we were talking about. Things like zinc, copper, boron, manganese, iron, and then even the kind of macro elements that plants need: calcium, magnesium. And so we're kind of addressing these deficiencies by foliar feeding with trace minerals, which is direct uptake by the plant, which allows the plant to have a stronger immune system, have a more complete function, and it enables them to create basically more resources for the soil organisms. And when we spray something like boron, when we put boron in our boron depleted soils, it enables certain enzyme processes for these critical organisms to function, which is then releasing more nutrients and doing what it does, that magic in the soil, to create the food and resources for the plants to grow more and feed this. It's just this virtuous cycle that we're kind of looking at.
And as we continue to walk, I'm curious, you know, to your knowledge of chemical, I don't want to even say chemical signatures, or any sort of way that plants can communicate with other plants and even other animals, in this case protozoa, like you're talking about, fungi and bacteria, other living things. So, like, to what extent does that occur, and do we know about it, and how much do you think we perhaps don't know enough of, right? Because you have crops that are paired well together, right? And they feed off each other. The bacteria, you know, what one does helps the other. So I wonder if you could speak to that point, if you have any insight there.
It's a big question. Soil science is a really exciting field right now, because I'd say over the last 20 or 30 years, just the observation equipment and the proliferation of certain fundamental knowledge of soil biology and soil microbiology has allowed more research to be done to understand some of the complex signatures between cell-to-cell communication and microbial communication, and
potentially the microbial communication with other microbes as well as with the plant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Quorum sensing is something that I've been learning about, that we take advantage of in our foliar program. We get these quorum sensing molecules that are basically extracted from the living organisms that produce them, stabilized, and then it's not like a stabilized microbial thing. It's literally like the communication molecules that signal these organisms to be active. It signals that there's a lot of activity. It signals that it's, you know, a habitable place, a really good place.
Maybe akin to hormones in humans, similar? If
or
not,
akin to like social media. Or cell phones.
Wow, and can you spell it? Is it Q or?
Q-U-O-R-U-M.
Q-U-R-O-U-M, okay.
Quorum.
Quorum.
And it's just one example of...
It's like plant thoughts almost, or something. I mean, that's like amazing.
It's microbes are so much more coordinated than we ever thought. They are in sync. There's huge levels of coordinated activity. And so if you think about plants, and this is how we think about plants here, as in relationship with a soil ecosystem, an atmosphere and the air, then we're looking at like an entire system of communication.
Right.
And so the exudates and having living plants in the ground year round is the best way to support the life cycle underground. And by adding things in like quorum sensing, it stimulates them all to wake up. You know, think about the legacy of tilling and spraying, and
Right.
This field was in a landscape tree nursery. So this had rows of trees that were planted to be dug up and sent to, you know, housing developments and
Right.
whatever, you know, all these places that are, you know, taking farmland and turning them into people farms.
Right.
And they would spray herbicide in bands along the tree roots.
Okay.
And they would drive skid steers down with tracks up and down the lanes in the spring to dig stuff out. It's wet in the spring. You get compaction from that heavy equipment going up and down the row. So
Right.
lack of air, lack of nutrients, and then the herbicide all really diminishes the soil life. And so we're kind of stimulating it and then making sure those physical, biological, and chemical limiting factors are removed.
And that's fascinating, and bravo to the great practices you're doing. I hope our viewers watching this will not only subscribe and share, but more importantly, you know, think about, wow, this is an amazing complex ecosystem, and what we think of as a communication, what we're using as words right now and facial expressions as we, you know, interact back and forth, and body language is communication for us. And there's massive communication and quite complex coordinated communication that occurs within plants, soils, microbes, bacteria, fungi, protists, and it's something we'll continue to discover. You know, because what you said, the advent of new technologies, microscopes, and other just discoveries has really opened up a whole new door into this science. So do you see, for those viewers out there that are they're college, high school, middle school, and younger or older, you know, an increase in the need for soil scientists and careers that are not only well paying, but, you know, give wholesome good work to people, you know, looking to contribute to humanity and live a good life?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Soil microbiology is a really exciting field, and the soil microbiologist that I studied with is looking for someone to create a new addition to her book on brewing compost tea. And
really?
There's a lot of...
And what's her name?
Elaine Ingham.
Elaine?
Ingham.
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 Yeah.
And that's the book again is?
Well, she's got the compost tea brewing manual.
Okay.
And...
So she's looking for a partner. If you're out there.
Well, you know, that was a few years ago.
Maybe, right.
There's still more work to be done, in other words, especially in regards to researching the effectiveness of spraying compost tea on production rates and things like we're doing with our foliar nutrition program, and how that affects growth rates, soil microbial communities, soil organic matter, and how that correlates with things like water absorption and water holding capacity of soils.
Water holding capacity of soils.
You get an inch of rain, how much of that rain actually soaks in and absorbs?
Right.
How much of it runs off and just creates erosion?
We can have the most
banks.
efficient, you know, drip irrigation spraying on the earth with massive tractors and other technology. But if we don't have soil that can retain that water in a healthy way for the plants, you know, it's a waste.
Yeah. So we've got some monitoring equipment here that we're partnering with company called Landstream. That's been developing, kind of putting together a suite of monitoring equipment to look at exactly those things, and we're, you know, trying to measure what we're doing as realistically as possible. We're not a research institution,
right,
but, you know, we're doing some things that not everyone's doing, and we want to see how effective is it.
And to that point, do you know how many other farms, East Coast, West Coast, United States, worldwide, are doing similar things? Because this is, you know, I mean, this is impressive to me, but this is also, you know, I'm learning as we're literally talking about all these terms and the methodologies you use.
Yeah, there's a network of people out there, more than I thought, and I think it's growing because with the growth of organic production nationwide, and the consciousness of people around organic production and being more interested in buying organic food, organic farmers are really being challenged by not growing or growing without chemicals and reducing the amount of tillage, and those two things right there, tilling and spraying, are kind of how the farming systems run, is how people get crops. And so
tilling and spraying, how not to do that, be profitable,
exactly.
have a healthier long-term outcome for your consumers. I mean, the food that you eat here, that is produced here, must have such a, talk about a microbiome, the biome film. Imagine that then being added to your microbiome in your internal, gut. So that's got to be, people are out there popping pills trying to improve their gut bacteria, right? Taking the the probiotics. Well, maybe you should take a step back and say, okay, well, what kind of food am I eating?
Yeah.
And what kind of microbiomes do those substances have, and how can that help mine?
Yeah, and looking at things like, well, there's trace minerals absent in soils. And these, like the trace minerals and micronutrients, something like zinc.
Yeah.
If you look up Google Scholar, zinc nutrition, how critical it is to so many cell processes, immune function, but it's only needed in tiny amounts.
Right.
But it's not in the soil, so it's not
in the food.
Really in the food.
And so we're trying to supplement it with these pills, but who knows if we're getting the right dosages and bioavailability and the other like zinc alone, right? You're talking about for the viewers out here, bioavailability, talking about you might just have zinc, at a pill at the end or beginning of a meal.
However the lab makes it.
Right. It might be a different form, a chelate or something, but maybe I don't use that term correctly. It just might be a different form of zinc that's not as bioavailable, or when coupled with a calcium with another organic molecule, the body is more likely to receive it and absorb it.
Yeah. I mean, we started talking about nutrition, and there's going to be a million different ways to go, and people, definitely I have a healthy respect for the many different perspectives on nutrition, and when I start anyone talking about nutrient content in foods, it gets contentious. And
right. And we respect all views. We're just starting and continuing the conversation.
I mean, I'm not. I don't pretend to be an expert, but I think it's obvious to me that, and a growing number of people, that these are really important things to look at.
Right.
And it's not being addressed in the conventional production systems, and so, there's a lot of farms, just people, citizen scientists doing great work. There's certain research institutions all across the country that, university, land-grant education systems that are starting to look at some of these things, whether it be living composts and extracts in the organisms, in the soil organisms, or doing no-till and trying to, increase the fungal activity in the soil through different minimal tillage farming practices. So we have many peers, and at the same time, some of the things that we're doing with our monitoring, with Landstream, and trying to pull it all together with our vegetable practices, our perennial landscape, the grazing practices, multi-species herds, multi-species pastures with vastly increased amount of diversity, including herbs in the pastures, and that's effect on animal health.
Really? Wow.
A lot of the momentum of farming over the last century has been to create monocultures and reduce diversity of species.
Right, and
simplify and create certain efficiencies.
Simplify, mass produce, assume what you're doing is correct, and repeat, reduce the amount of space animals have, that you reduce the amount of nutrients plants have in order to pump out the biggest, fastest, what we think is the most profitable tomato. And I've heard of that, right? Polyculture, I've heard of monoculture. I have, to this day, not heard of a polyculture reference and practice towards animal husbandry. So multi-species herds.
Yeah.
Multi-species herds with I don't know, mint, other herbs that are in that grazing pasture and that affecting the animals.
Yeah.
Completely ingenious.
Yeah.
And biomimicking, right? It's what would happen in nature.
Yeah.
So why not, mimic the force that brought us all here?
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Yeah, so we've got cover crops growing in this field, and we had this is vetch here. You could actually see this bumblebee is hanging out on vetch.
Oh, they're right
Great
there.
for pollinators. We've got 4 honeybee hives too, so all these cover crops are here when we're not growing crops in them, and we try to kind of go back to back with our cover crops as far as succession. And when a spring crop comes out, we put a cover crop in for the summer.
Okay.
When that's done, we put our fall crop in. We try to keep rotations that way, and really thinking about the root activity, keeping the exudates, keeping the sun energy going into the microbial environment year round.
I love that. Keeping the sun energy going into the microbial soil environment year round.
Yeah.
Right, that's awesome. That is truly awesome. You're having the exudates, the excrement, the excretion, the depositing of these chemical and biological nutrients back into the ground, so that next crop can have the nutrients available.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Eric Fuchs-Stengel, the leader of MIVO, Mawa Environmental Volunteer Organization, also uses vetch, and they have some similar practices, all organic, and they use some other advanced practices with soil irrigation similar to the contouring here, and they too have vetch, and they have bees, which I saw on the way in. Could you talk to our viewers about how many bees you have on campus or on this land, and why they're also a critical, important part of this whole ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm gonna keep walking because we got a lot of farm to see, and
a lot of farms. So we're gonna be walking. Please forgive if it's a little bit jumpy and a little bit bumpy. We'll see if we can edit that out in post, but let's do this. Fast as we need to walk, let's do it.
Bees. Bees are one of many pollinators, and everyone likes honey. Right now we've got 4 honeybee hives. So in addition to honeybees, there's all kinds of native bees that most people don't think about, which do a lot of work pollinating plants and creating fruit for our vegetables and things. If a flower doesn't get pollinated, then it doesn't form a fruit.
Can you teach us about the native bee species that perhaps go unheard of, or there's less focus on them because we use the typical European and Italian, even some Chinese imported bees?
Imported bees. I mean, that's kind of reaching the range of my knowledge.
Right. I mean, we have mason bees, we have bumblebees, we have other bees that don't necessarily produce honey. And from what I've learned, it is the quote European, which is also, again, they have Chinese and other sort of bees in there, and they crossbreed, just like our culture and population. But that the honeybee is one of the only, if not the only, bee that produces an excess of honey to store and eat later. Which is interesting. You talk about consciousness of the bacteria and the ability for these microbes to plan ahead and work in coordination. Well, look at the bees, and they're planning, to have food, for a rainy day, so to speak. So.
Yeah.
And I just want to take a moment here and just take a look at this vast 200+ acre land.
About 200.
And the name of the farm again for our viewers?
Carversville Farm Foundation.
Carversville Farm Foundation. Look it up. Come buy some beautiful organic produce, some grass-fed, completely free-range organic beef, pork, and chickens, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
So what I'm thinking is we've got the sun